Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. It is quite exciting to be here today to talk about, in a way, what Edwina's described. She's finished about half my slides, in terms of how the world has changed. We've worked in understanding customers through data for, 30 plus years, and that's sort of a long time. And it's certainly, if you look back at geodemographics, when geodemographics were first developed, it did light a light. I mean, it revolutionized, it developed a whole series of new targeting methods. Today we don't think twice about them, and we see them as routine. But I think it is worth looking back. We've always wanted to understand our audiences, the people we want to reach. That is, for a marketeer, that is a fundamental need. It started in the 50s with newspapers and TVs wanting to sell their advertising space, and it really became you are your job. And let's face it, we're still buying ABC1 housewives as part of our targeting processes today. And as Edwina said, geodemographics probably was the biggest major change in targeting. Everything else since then, I believe, has simply been an evolution of that, and I'll look at why that has been in a moment. But this was the idea of you are where you live. Now, you know, I remember when I first entered the industry before geodemographics, that really dates me, neighbor mailings was one of the most popular targeting methods in direct marketing. You literally took your file, you matched it to the electoral roll or something similar, and you literally mailed the person who lived either side of the person who just bought your product. And the logic of that sort of makes sense, you know, well, you know, Mrs. Jones will be talking about her new car, Mr. Smith will be really hacked off that he hasn't got one, it's a good idea. And basically geodemographics was really a mature way of thinking about the idea of neighbor mailings. It was basically saying there are neighborhoods. And even today, as geodemographics has developed to become almost personal, we've overlaid your personal demographics on top of that. Essentially, the essence is still the same. You are where you live, driving what's changing. And geodemographics went around the world. Then, in the 2000s, we started looking at the idea of customer data. It's important to recognize, up until then, customer data was so expensive to keep, people threw it away. And then it became you are what you buy. And obviously, you know, Edwina and I probably made our name primarily at Humby when we did the deal with Tesco. We helped Tesco go from a 16% to 30% market share in the UK. Obviously, there was many other factors besides Clubcard that made that happen. But basically, that evolution was all about understanding the customer through what they bought. And that's absolutely fantastic if you're a grocer. Because if you're a grocer, if you're a customer of a grocer, you buy the same things every week. You have a repertoire of brands that you will buy into. You have your favorite coffee, your favorite toothpaste. And by understanding those things about people, you could get more and more relevant to them. And that's the first time I hope I've used the word relevant, but it won't be the last. And you become more and more relevant to that customer as you understand them better, understand whether they're price driven, whether their kids matter or not, whether they know how to cook, whether they love promotions on their favorite brands and stock up. Those things become fundamentals of the retail mechanics. But for virtually anyone who isn't a grocer, you can't do that. Your transactions are too sparse. You might only have 5, 6, 7 transactions a year with even some of your best customers. How can you really understand the customer through what they're buying? You can't. When we left the industry for a year, we thought we'd retired. We got immensely bored and decided we ought to do something again. And we basically said, well, how do we help all those other organizations that aren't grocers? In a way, that was our original idea. And we started looking at all of the data sources that we could see coming down the track. We looked at mobile phone data, we looked at credit card data, we had discussions with people who own that sort of data, we looked at social data, search data, etc. And we came across a company called Starcount. And what Starcount was doing was basically understanding fans and their passions. The business at the time was a B2C company. It was trying to basically understand fans and offer fans products. And the economics of that in the social world just do not work. You have to be a giant in social to be successful. But we saw the data they were collecting, we got very excited. We thought, well, actually, if you think about it, the things that you follow are like the things you choose to put in your shopping basket. Yeah? I like following rugby. I like following sailing. I like following exotic holidays. Those things are things I'm choosing to put in my shopping basket. Could we apply the mathematics of shopping baskets to this rich graph of fans and what they love? And that became our big idea. And today you're seeing the first public version of what we're doing. We've been using the data in a consultative way for some time, but we have not yet launched a product that sort of goes into the worlds of the acorns and the mosaics. And that's what today is all about. So it's really about you are what you love and understanding you through your passions. And if you think about it, that's talked about a lot today in marketing. We talk a lot about tribes, we talk a lot about mindsets, we talk a lot about psychographics, we talk about different need sets that our customers have. Those things actually manifest themselves very clearly in these new exciting big data sources. And our purpose isn't to stop here. What we feel is this is the beginning of a very exciting journey. Just like geodemographics evolved very quickly in the first few years, we think this is the first step in a very exciting evolution of really understanding why customers buy. And that's why we've got the strapline, the science of purchase and intent. So, relevant targeting. That's what we think it's about. And we've all used this word. And I think the problem is people confuse the word what relevant really means. Relevant doesn't mean personalization. Personalization is about talking to a customer and showing you know them through their name, through you last visited the store, through things that you know about them that makes them feel at least you care. Relevance is about talking to the person in a tone and about a subject which they care about. And be honest, they care about something much more than your brand. Yeah? It might be their kids, it might be their health, it might be their next holiday, but they care about something much more than yourself, than your brand. And so relevant targeting is really about saying, can we in some way understand what really matters to people and engage in a meaningful way with them? And what happens if you do that? Well, basically, you're going to see at least a 20% improvement on your return on investment. I personally think that's low, but we found this figure quoted, and we thought, well, that's a pretty nice figure to use, so let's stick that into our equation and see whether this all works out for people. Now, if we really can be relevant, we can tackle many of the things that are facing us today. Let's face it, GDPR has been a bit of a bomb for all of us. I'm talking to a lot of organizations at the moment who are worried about their reconsents, who are worried about the opt-out rates they're seeing, who are recognizing that customers have taken much more control. And what's very clear is customers take control when you bombard them. You know, I don't want to receive an email every other day telling me that I need a new pair of shoes. It just drives me nuts. And actually, if we're relevant and talk to people in a meaningful way, we'll reduce those unsubscribes. And remember, when we lose a customer from our database, we don't lose a sale, we lose the ability to make a sale from that point onwards to that person. We can really improve lookalikes. Lookalikes is still an immensely powerful way of finding people. Basically, if we can find people who look like our existing customers, we have got a much more better chance. And basically, the more understanding we can have of someone, the better we can make lookalike targeting. And so actually, if we can improve lookalikes, we can basically improve our acquisition activity. And again, that's very important to us. Acquisition is getting harder. We're fishing in a smaller and smaller pond. A whole pile of things are impacting us. We're really excited because I think for the first time, we think we've got a tool that works in every channel with the same language. And I'll talk about the different languages in different channels in a moment. But one of the real challenges at the moment is that actually it's really hard to translate your TV schedule and your magazine and poster schedule and your social schedule to the same set of metrics, because you're using different targeting mechanisms in those different channels. So we don't understand, A, how to measure how they join together and whether they have composite effects. And last but not least, because this data is being collected by us in a constant manner, we can understand trends and we can understand people entering and leaving. One of the great weaknesses of geodemographics is, broadly speaking, once you've got that label, you've really got that label for a very long time. You might have a child and move slightly if you're using a personal level geodemographic that classifies a household type. But broadly speaking, if you live at 27 Acacia Avenue and you're 35 to 44, you're that type and you'll stay that type. Whereas what we're doing is, because we're looking at what's happening in real time, well, I shouldn't say real time, every month, because we're looking at what's happening every month, we can see how people are changing. And I think what is very clear is people are changing quite quickly in some markets, particularly emerging markets and new passions. So, for example, we do quite a lot of work in the health and wellness area. You know, we've seen a whole new category developed in places like turmeric and CBD oil that were literally non-existent. We've seen apple cider vinegar as a big new cure, and it's already come and it's beginning to go. So there's huge changes that go on. So this is all about the classics of one-to-one. It's about the right person, the right message, the right channel, the right time. And that's really what we're really excited about. And we're not saying this is perfect today, but we're really excited about what we found. We're really excited about how granular it gets, and Rowena will describe that a lot more in a moment. Now, there are brands doing it as well as they can today. People like Tesco have been using Clubcard for a long time. Because they understand the customer so well, they talk to the customer in a really relevant way about their grocery needs. But it's really tough outside of grocery. There are people who are doing it well. I was really excited. I went to see a company called Habit, which is basically doing personalized food, where basically they use blood tests and things like that to basically recommend a diet composition that suits your body as best it can. Particularly if you're interested in being, exercising or being a marathon runner or being a cyclist, to get the right mix of proteins, the right mix of inputs into your body that suits your body chemistry. And there are others, obviously, that are doing really well in terms of targeting people and talking to people in as relevant a way as they can. But what are the issues with this? Well, the first one is that marketing is immensely siloed. As I touched on, your different channels are purchased in very different ways. Most of us are still buying our broadcast media through Barb or JROS surveys, which look at the demographics broadly in terms of ABC1s and income levels. Print and outdoor is still mostly bought using survey data again, either through geodemographic targeting in outdoor or through services like TGI, which give you very crude understanding of the audience. CRM, you may have applied a geodemographic system to your CRM database and your behavioral data. But when it comes to digital and below the line, you've got very different targeting techniques, and I'll look at each of those in a moment. And the real problem is that we've got a walled garden situation. What's really happened, if you go into the digital community, the various different ways of reaching consumers, and I've just picked a few here, each of them are basically a walled garden. You don't really know what's going on inside that walled garden. I'll give you a great example. So you can all go and look at the things that you're selected for example, on Facebook. I looked at the things that Facebook thought I was, and it said I was into motorcycling. And I thought, well, I'm not into motorcycling, why is that then? And the only thing I can think of is I clicked on a story about a storyline in Sons of Anarchy about a year ago. One click. And almost certainly that's the only thing I can think of that's labelled me that I'm somehow a candidate for a motorcycle. I just cannot see anything else in my profile that would make them feel that. And the problem is you don't know why the customer has been labelled as a motorcycling enthusiast. I mean, Facebook says, we've got 500,000 motorcycling enthusiasts. Great, yes, but it includes me, and I'm definitely not a motorcycling enthusiast. I gave that up when I was 18. And the same is true of all of these different channels. You don't really know why, they're telling you this person is a target. And that's really hard then to be relevant, because you can only give the right message if you know why. Each of these have really powerful targeting tools. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we shouldn't be using the targeting tools that in these systems. They're making the best of the data that they have, and they're trying to basically give you the ability to reach people. I'm not saying they're wrong. What I am saying, it's really hard for you as a brand to be relevant to your customers in these walled gardens because you don't know why. The clickstream data that the Google DoubleClick are using, you don't really know why. There's a lot of false signals in that data. You don't know who's using the computer. You don't know why those clicks happen. I've already talked about Facebook and Instagram in terms of, just because you like one thing, is that the right answer? If you look at, for example, I'm really excited. For instance, we might even be able to do geographic targeting of television with Sky AdSmart. That really is an exciting development. But actually, what sits behind those people really, really matters. How do my calling and visiting patterns really drive contact with me on my mobile phone? So all of these have their problems, and therefore we decided that in reality they're all hiding behind this really tall grass in their gardens. So I hope you'll appreciate my very poor joke. So let's go back to where Edwin and I started, geodemographics. Geodemographics really took off, and I don't know how many people know the original story, but when CACI was the first commercial census agency in the UK, we were trying to predict spend in local geographic areas. At the very beginning, CACI primarily focused on retail location work. And we wanted to know how many washing machines are you going to sell if you open a Curry's in Leicester. And what was happening is we were building mathematical models that basically took all the geodemographic data and tried to predict what would happen. And we saw a piece of work by Richard Webber on a thing called a classification of residential neighbourhoods. At the time, I led the maths team, and we were building a mathematical model for every single question on TGI. And we saw this amazing presentation by Richard Webber, and we got very excited because what Richard was really saying is you are where you live. This really is a good substitute. And we basically saw how good we could be using a typology like Richard's instead of building individual mathematical models. And what we found was it wasn't as good as building individual mathematical models, but it was nearly as good. And we looked at the consequence of that, and we said, basically, if we've got TGI coded with a geodemographic, we can then build models to predict consumption much more quickly. We can have a much smaller team. And that's really how Acorn was born commercially. The work had been done in the research center on environmental studies. And we basically brought the idea of targeting those two things together. And if you think about what does that do? That takes the 24,000 people who answer a question on a market research panel and say, I bought a washing machine in the last year. And it says, okay, what are the demographics of those people, and where do they live, and therefore how likely are other people to buy a washing machine? And the model effectively says, because you live in a street type A, you have a propensity 1.5 times the national average to buy a washing machine, which was good enough for retail location, and for a long time was good enough for one-to-one communication. But today it's not. The reality is building a model on 24,000 people and spreading that uniformly over the country is not a good idea. We're in the age of big data now. A sample of 24,000 people does not give you enough granularity to understand the subtleties, the differences between Liverpool and Manchester, between Hull and York. You can't say that just because you're in the northwest and you live in that sort of neighbourhood, your consumptions are going to be similar. And we'll look at that a little bit more. The other issue with many of these techniques is they were built at the time on 10-yearly census data. Again, that was difficult. Now, obviously, that has improved a great deal as we've basically seen electoral rolls and other data sets being built that give us more information on an annual basis, house movement, those other things. But ultimately, you'll still get a single label for a person. A label that says you live in you're a married couple with kids, and in AO2 is the poshest mosaic type. Okay, and guess what? That means you are into golf and wine. Well, no, not really. It means 8% of those people are into golf, and 25% of those people are into wine. And obviously that model is then spread over everywhere. So it doesn't matter whereabouts in London as an AO2 you are, that's your probability of liking golf. That's an outdated view. So why is it outdated? Well, because times change. We wouldn't think, well, some like me might think, but we don't buy cars with cassettes in anymore. The cassette is dead. Spotify has taken over. Streaming services have become a way that we consume music. The music market has changed fundamentally. And we believe the same revolution is happening when we think about geodemographics and how do we get really, really relevant. And I love this story. When I started my career, if you wanted 1 terabyte of storage, it would have cost you $1 million. Today you can buy it for $30 on Amazon. And that's really what has changed. We can keep data and use data in a major way, very, very economically. And that is the real trick. So what data do we need to use, and how can we use it? We don't have to worry anymore. The whole idea of geodemographics was one code summarizes a lot of data for a small area. We don't need to do that anymore. We have AI tools, we have immensely powerful computers, and we have very cheap storage. We can keep as much data as we wish. We can harness as much data as we wish. We just have to teach the tools to use the data well. And that's what we've done. We're basically looking at all of these data sets to try and understand what matters to people and how to understand that at a very fine geographic level. So we're not basically giving an area a code and saying there's a propensity of that area to do something. We're saying we know this number of people in this area and this is what they're doing. It's a fundamental change from the old model of geodemographics. But it's being delivered in a GDPR way to basically look like the geodemographic approach, because that gives us something that can be very powerful and we can use with sensitivity and without worrying about many of the privacy issues that personal data will bring. And we have to respect the fact that using personal data is going to get increasingly sensitive in targeting. So we're trying to harness social data, search data, government and census statistics. They're still very valuable. There are now a whole host of new data sets being released by government in open data form, mobile data and transactional data. We see all of these coming together. And what we're trying to do at Starcount is help organizations think about what data they already have, what other data they need from outside their organization to complement that, and to build tools using that data. And today with audiences, we're announcing our first version of something that uses purely external data. But I hope what you'll realize, and Rowena will show you, what you can do in terms of uploading your own data into that tool and comparing your data with the passions and motivations that we find. So this is the next evolution, we think. We're really excited about it. I'm very proud about it because I think we've gone full circle. I think it's a very exciting development. We are at the early stages. We know that. It's not the finished article, although it's very impressive. I'm really proud of it. But what I would like to do now is hand over to Rowena, and she's going to take you through the tool, through what we mean by passions and motivations, and really understand how we can use data in a much more relevant way for you and your customers. Thank you.